The first time Evelyn Carter saw the house, she felt an unsettling pull in her chest. It loomed at the edge of town, nestled beside a forgotten graveyard where crooked tombstones jutted from the earth like broken teeth. The house was ancient, its walls weathered by time, its windows hollow and dark, staring out like vacant eyes. Evelyn had been in Ravenshade for only a few hours when she first heard about the estate. She had come to this small, mist-veiled town in search of a fresh start. The weight of her past clung to her like a persistent shadow, and this place, silent, remote, and untouched by the modern world, seemed like the perfect place to disappear. It was in a dimly lit cafe on Main Street that she overheard the first whispers about the house. "You don't want to go near that place," an old man muttered to the bartender. "That house ain't just empty. It's waiting." Evelyn sipped her coffee, pretending not to listen. But something about his tone made her spine tingle. The bartender scoffed. "You still believe that old tale, Henry? Nobody's lived there in years." Henry leaned in, his voice dropping to a near whisper. "Aye, and there's a reason for that. Folks who step inside don't always come out." A low chuckle spread through the cafe, but Henry's face remained grave. Evelyn felt an odd curiosity creep over her. Maybe it was the way he said it, or maybe it was the way the bartender avoided meeting his eyes. The house had a story, and stories always had a truth buried beneath them. That night, Evelyn lay in bed at the small inn she had rented, staring at the ceiling. The rain tapped gently against the window, and the wind howled like a distant voice. She should have ignored the conversation at the cafe. She should have let the mystery of the house remain just that, a mystery. But something inside her wouldn't let go. By morning, she had made up her mind. She would visit the house. The path leading to the estate was overgrown, the gravel road cracked and swallowed by time. As Evelyn walked through the arching trees, an eerie silence settled over her. Even the birds refused to sing. The house stood as it had in her memory, a towering specter against the grey sky. The iron gate screeched as she pushed it open, and the scent of damp earth and rotting wood filled her lungs. She hesitated for only a moment before stepping onto the porch. The floorboards creaked under her weight, as if sighing in protest. She reached for the doorknob, but before she could touch it, the door swung open on its own. Evelyn's breath hitched. The house had been abandoned for decades. No one lived here, and yet, it had just welcomed her inside. The interior was cloaked in dust and decay. Faded wallpaper peeled from the walls, revealing dark, jagged cracks beneath. A grand staircase stretched upward, its wooden steps warped with age. The chandelier above hung at an unnatural angle, its crystals dull and lifeless. Evelyn stepped forward, her boots leaving imprints in the thick layer of dust. She could feel it now, that odd, unseen presence in the air. Something was watching her. She wandered deeper into the house, drawn by an inexplicable force. The hallways twisted and stretched, the doors lining the walls seeming too many, too close together. Some of them were locked. Others stood ajar, revealing glimpses of rooms that shouldn't exist, an empty nursery filled with cobwebs, a library with books that looked untouched for centuries, a grand ballroom frozen in time. Then she heard it, a whisper. It came from the end of the hallway, from behind a door that looked different from the rest. Her heart pounded as she reached for the handle. The wood was ice cold beneath her fingers. Slowly, she pushed it open. The room was dark, save for the faint light filtering through a single, cracked window. Dust motes swirled in the air, disturbed by her presence. At the center of the room stood an old wooden chair, and in that chair sat a doll. It was unlike any doll Evelyn had ever seen, its porcelain face cracked, its eyes deep and hollow. Its mouth was stitched shut with black thread, and its hands were clasped in its lap as if in prayer. A sharp chill ran down her spine. Then, the whisper came again, but this time, it was right behind her. Evelyn froze. The whisper, soft, raspy, like breath against her ear, sent a violent shudder down her spine. She turned sharply, expecting to see someone behind her. But the room was empty. Only the doll remained, sitting eerily still in the chair, its hollow eyes locked onto her. Her pulse pounded in her ears as she backed away, her instincts screaming at her to leave. Yet, just as she reached the door, it slammed shut with a deafening bang. Evelyn gasped, fumbling for the handle, twisting it with desperate force. It wouldn't budge. A giggle echoed in the room, childlike, distant, yet everywhere at once. Her breath hitched. She turned toward the doll, dread pooling in her stomach. It was no longer sitting in the chair. It was on the floor, face down. A sickening realization crawled over her skin. It moved. Something unseen slithered in the darkness around her, the air thick with decay and something far worse, malice. Then the whisper came again. Stay. Evelyn clenched her fists. Who are you? What do you want? Silence. Then, suddenly, the room shifted. The walls seemed to pulse, breathing like a living thing. The floorboards groaned as if something beneath them was waking up. And then, a hand burst through the rotting floor. Fingers twisted and skeletal, its flesh peeling like dried parchment. It clawed at the wood, dragging itself upward. Evelyn screamed. She slammed against the door, throwing her entire weight into it. The whispering grew louder, overlapping voices, crying, laughing, shrieking. Then, the lock clicked, the door flew open, and Evelyn stumbled into the hallway, gasping for air. Behind her, the room collapsed into darkness. The whispers stopped. Only the house remained, silent and waiting. Evelyn ran, down the hall, down the stairs, out the front door. She didn't stop until she reached the iron gate, her heart hammering against her ribs. The house loomed behind her, its windows dark and watching. The town was empty when she returned, eerily still, as if no one had ever lived there. Had it been real? The whispers, the doll, the hand. Then she felt it, something cold in her palm. Slowly, she opened her trembling fingers. A small porcelain hand rested in her palm, detached, broken. The doll's hand. Her breath caught in her throat. And then, from the graveyard beside the house, the whisper came one last time. See you soon. The house stood at the edge of an abandoned graveyard, its towering silhouette lost in the embrace of the dense, creeping fog. The locals never dared to step foot near it after dark. Rumors whispered of strange noises, flickering lights in the attic, and shadows that moved without an owner. No one had lived there in decades, until now. Eleanor Gray, a 27-year-old journalist, had always been drawn to the macabre. When she inherited the old house from a distant aunt she barely remembered, she saw it as an opportunity. She wasn't afraid of ghosts or urban legends. If anything, she was fascinated by them. Her car rolled to a stop in front of the rusted iron gates, which screeched as she pushed them open. The path leading to the house was overgrown, weeds twisting through cracked stone. The wind whispered through the trees, carrying the scent of damp earth and decay. As Eleanor approached the front door, she hesitated. Something felt off. The house loomed over her, its windows like hollow eyes staring into her soul. She shook off the unease and turned the key. The door groaned open, revealing a dimly lit hallway filled with dust and the echoes of forgotten memories. Inside, the air was stale, thick with the scent of old wood and mildew. The walls were lined with faded wallpaper, peeling at the edges. A grand staircase stood in the center, leading up into the darkness. Eleanor exhaled and stepped inside, her footsteps muffled by the thick layer of dust on the wooden floor. She had barely taken 5 steps when a loud thud echoed from upstairs. Eleanor froze. The house was supposed to be empty. She turned her head toward the staircase, heart pounding. The silence that followed was deafening. Had something fallen, or was someone up there? Hello, she called, her voice barely above a whisper. No answer. A sudden chill swept through the hallway, making the chandelier above her sway slightly. She pulled her jacket tighter around her body. Get a grip, Eleanor, she muttered to herself. It's just an old house. Old houses make noise. Trying to ignore the gnawing unease in her chest, she made her way to the living room. It was just as abandoned as the rest of the house. Dust-covered furniture, cobwebs clinging to the corners. A large fireplace stood against the far wall, a portrait of a woman hanging above it. Eleanor's gaze locked onto the painting. The woman's dark eyes seemed to follow her, her lips twisted into a faint, knowing smile. Something about the portrait unsettled her, but she refused to let her imagination get the best of her. She set her bags down and pulled out her phone to check the time. 8:47 p.m. It was already getting late. She decided to check out the upstairs rooms before calling it a night. As she placed her foot on the first step, a whisper brushed against her ear. "Leave." Eleanor's blood ran cold. She spun around, scanning the room behind her. There was no one there. The house was silent. It had to be the wind. Swallowing hard, she continued up the staircase. Each step groaned under her weight. At the top, a long, dark hallway stretched before her, lined with closed doors. The atmosphere felt heavier here, the air thicker, harder to breathe. She reached for the nearest door and slowly pushed it open. The room inside was a bedroom. Dusty, untouched, but still carrying an eerie presence. The bed was made, as if someone had been expecting a guest. A rocking chair sat in the corner, facing the window. As Eleanor stepped closer, the floor creaked beneath her. She reached for the curtains to let in some light, but before she could touch them, the rocking chair moved. On its own. Eleanor's breath hitched. A cold hand gripped her shoulder. She screamed, and the lights went out. Eleanor Gray stood in the center of the decaying house, her breath coming in ragged gasps. Blood trickled from a gash on her forehead, mixing with the dust and sweat on her skin. The walls trembled, as if the house itself was alive, responding to the chaos within. The spirits had awakened. She could hear them, whispers slithering through the air like unseen serpents, voices overlapping in a ghostly symphony of pain, rage, and sorrow. The woman from the portrait, the one with the cold, knowing smile, now stood at the top of the grand staircase, her hollow eyes locked onto Eleanor. "You should not have come." Eleanor staggered back, clutching the old journal she had found in the attic, the diary of Margaret Holloway, the last known owner of this house before she mysteriously vanished a century ago. The pages told a horrifying truth. Margaret had been sacrificed. The villagers had feared the house, believing it was cursed. They had taken Margaret, bound her, and spilled her blood in the basement to appease the darkness. But instead of sealing the evil, they had fed it. The house had absorbed Margaret's soul, trapping her in eternal torment. And now, Eleanor was next. The shadows twisted along the walls, stretching toward her like hungry hands. The air grew heavier, pressing against her chest. She knew she had to end this, now. With trembling hands, she opened the diary to the final page. "The only way to free me. Burn it. Burn the house. Burn everything." Eleanor's gaze darted to the fireplace. She had to do it. There was no other way. With shaking fingers, she pulled out her lighter. The flame flickered, casting distorted shadows across the walls. She hesitated only for a moment before dropping the diary into the fireplace. The dry pages caught fire instantly, the flames spreading hungrily. A scream erupted, not from Eleanor, but from the house itself. The walls cracked, the ceiling groaned, and an unseen force sent Eleanor flying backward. She hit the ground hard, pain jolting through her body. Through blurred vision, she saw Margaret standing there, her expression unreadable. The woman's lips parted. "Thank you." Then, like smoke dissolving into the wind, she was gone. The house roared in fury, its very foundation shaking as fire consumed it from within. Eleanor scrambled to her feet, stumbling toward the front door. The heat was unbearable, the air filled with thick, suffocating smoke. With one final desperate push, she burst through the front doors and into the graveyard beyond. She collapsed onto the damp earth, coughing violently as the night sky was illuminated by the inferno behind her. She turned to watch as the house, the cursed house, was swallowed by flames. And with it, the spirits finally found peace. As the first light of dawn crept over the horizon, Eleanor lay on the cold ground, staring at the smoldering ruins. The nightmare was over, or so she thought. A chilling breeze swept through the graveyard. And in the distance, just barely audible over the crackling fire, she heard a whisper. "We will always be here." The wind carried the laughter of the dead. Eleanor closed her eyes, and the graveyard remained silent once more.